Read Revelation.
Are you implying here some kind of conspiracy?
Hey everybody, welcome to the podcast. It is October 10th, Wednesday. Today in the news, inflation is still at 2.5%, I think it is. And why is the mainstream media in denial about weather modification? Got these headlines coming up and more, but don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a podcast, check me out on social media, Getter, X, Facebook Minds. All right, let's get into the news. All right, well, top of the news just broke from Reuters. U.S. consumer prices rise slightly above expectations in September. The mainstream media, though, is trying to tell you that inflation is down. But that doesn't really mean anything because inflation is compounded, as I often say. So it's 2.5% on top of what already existed, the 9%, the 30%, whatever the inflation is to now. Moving back to the headlines, though, this is from The Nation, the liberal rag. The Nation, the MAGA maniacs are going all in on deranged hurricane conspiracy theories. Now, this is the problem, folks, and this is The Nation. The subhead reads, "It's the Jews, it's the deep state, it's anything but a natural weather occurrence made much worse by climate change." That's the liberal line. But everybody knows weather modification exists. And are there secret programs existing in the United States? Of course there are. Does the United States, the federal government, engage in weather modification? Sure it does. But places like The Nation are trying to convince you that it doesn't. The article goes on to say, first they tried to claim that FEMA was the deep state ideological op, and that didn't work. So then hardcore MAGA rat chicks moved on to the real center of the action, the omnipotent cabal pushing American history leftward, control of the weather. Taking the lead from the reliable arbiter of rational discourse, Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, they began as Florida prepared for the landfall of the Hurricane Milton to sound the alarm that the first succession of destructive hurricanes battering the Southeast. The Southeast was orchestrated by a cabal from high and from the sinister power-grabbing left. So, obviously, and the story goes on to say, Greene's demented, undocumented assertion of first seemed a sideshow of the crisis, calling to mind her infamous declaration in 2018 wildflowers were actually a handiwork of Jewish space lasers. All right, I'm not going to go any further. She's trying to make it anti-Semitic, but actually lasers do exist. Space-based lasers actually do exist. Are they used for weather modification? We don't really know, but weather modification and these techniques do exist. They do fly planes into hurricanes. They do alter weather, particularly by cloud seeding, which is the most known program. It's not disclosed. It's a secret program, but it exists in the United States. Those chemtrails you see, that is weather modification, and it is, for the most part, cloud seeding. Moving on to more headlines here from The Independent concerning Marjorie Taylor Greene. Doubles down on weather modification conspiracy theories despite experts rubbishing hurricane control. Now, this is a British magazine making fun of a United States politician for saying weather modification exists. The subhead reads, "It's not possible for the government to produce or modify a hurricane." So the Independent goes on a limb and declares it is not possible for the government to produce or modify hurricanes. Now, we know that's not true, that the governments do, and it is possible, do have the technology to do so. Whether it is they're doing it, that of course is the question. But they do have the possibilities. We could point to a variety of military experiments and even operations conducted by the U.S. military in weather control. But the Independent goes on to say that has not stopped Marjorie Taylor Greene from spreading beyond ridiculous claims. The story goes on to say the Republican from Georgia claimed last week that they can control the weather after Hurricane Helene killed more than 24 people in her state and more than 230 across the U.S. While she did not clarify who they were, at the time, Joe Biden said the idea of federal government controlled the weather was beyond ridiculous. Well, that's Joe Biden, of course, and the United States can't declare they're modifying the weather because they're signed onto a treaty. More headlines. This is from NBC News. The science behind why people think they're right when they're so wrong. The new study illustrates the saying, you don't know what you don't know. To some extent, this is true, but the reason they publish this now is this is on the tail of articles about Marjorie Taylor Greene, why people believe they're right when they're right. And not when you say they're wrong, you have to obviously prove they're wrong. So, and I just want to bring up Operation Popeye because that's the most famous evidence of the U.S. government that ran the military in the 60s during the Vietnam War engaged in weather modification. So the article goes on from NBC News, there may be a psychological reason why some people aren't just wrong in an argument, they're confidently wrong. So if you have confidence when you know something's right and you tell somebody and they tell you that you're wrong, you understand they're engaged in gaslighting, and particularly with this article. According to a study published Wednesday in the journal PLOS One, it comes down to believing that you have all the information you need to form an opinion, even if you don't. Well, an opinion is an opinion. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people that are right, trying to relay factual information. Our brains are overconfident that they can arrive at reasonable conclusions with very little information, said Angus Fletcher, a professor of English at Ohio State University. So he's not even a psychologist. Fletcher, along with two psychology researchers, and they're not named here, set out to measure how people make judgments about situations or people based on their confidence in the information they have, even if it's not in the whole story. Right. So what they're doing is they're gaslighting you, and they're telling you if you don't have every single piece of information on the planet, how could you possibly make a sound judgment? You don't. You go from several different things. Obviously, your inclination, but you should also have information. That's why try to read things, because then you commit them to memory a little bit better. And obviously, the references. I read it here. I saw it here. Here it was written that so-and-so said this. When you hear things on TV, a lot of people just don't commit it to memory, and they don't remember proper attribution. All right, National Review. Democrats take aim at free speech. A lot of people may have seen the statements by John Kerry derailing free speech, but so does Hillary Clinton in her new book, and we're going to get to that in just a second. And with Tim Walz is saying there's no absolute free speech. You can't say fire in a crowded theater. But you can. What if you say fire in a crowded theater under your breath? You can't shout fire. So it's not the speech. Maybe it's the level of speech. So the National Review goes on to say the idea that news or information should be curated by referees who checks the ref for their bias, the National Review says, is a patronizing as yet is incompatible with free speech, and indeed science. Science is supposed to be the search of the truth, not the acceptance or orthodoxy. Science is supposed to be search for the truth. Sadly, there's no surprise that Kerry described the First Amendment as a major block to hammering a source of information of which he disapproved out of existence. At the same time, Clinton was talking about protecting the children, a ploy she has always been using, and its freedom enjoyed by adults that she's truly in her sights. She explained, we should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave, platforms on the internet immunity because they just thought to be pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content they posted. And this as referring to also X and what's going on in Brazil. Also, from the Washington Free Beacon, diminishing returns Hillary Clinton's second angsty screed about 2016 loss sells way fewer copies than the first. Maybe now she'll finally go away, or at least accept the fact that nobody really cares. That's from the Washington Free Beacon. And just people going on to say that, and Hillary Clinton particularly, she goes on in that book about how people shouldn't, and she's on a book tour now, and how people in the United States shouldn't be allowed to speak freely, otherwise be curated by corporations. And that's what we had going on, not only in 2016, but 2020 with election interference. Conservatives couldn't post their political views on some of the, and those actions were reinforced and sometimes requested by the White House, which is government. In any case, the Post-Millennial is reporting that Afghan man arrested in an election day terror plot was given special visa under Biden-Harris administration. So if you didn't hear about this, an Afghan refugee, I guess you would say, because he came here under the Biden administration after the failed military withdrawal from Afghanistan. He came into this country in 2001, and so now he was just accused, and we were warning of this. Some of these Afghan interpreters have Islamic militancy ties, and here we go. One of these guys wanted to carry out an election day attack. So terrorism, that's election interference, and these people are being let in, and I believe controlled by the left. Got other headlines here from the Federalist. Democrats' idea of progress is shoveling billions of dollars into illegals and insurance companies. And I'll get into this story in just a second, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that the Democrats are not only letting illegals in, and in some case terrorists, like this guy, this Afghan, but we're paying for them to be here. So the Federalist is reporting Democrats' idea of progress is shoveling billions of dollars to illegals and insurance companies. And this is about the CBO. So the House Budget Committee quantified Medicaid payments made for the care of illegal immigrants and recent changes in Medicare spending due to a bill Democrats passed 2 years ago. The analysis demonstrates how the Inflation Reduction Act, which is not what it did, approved anything but, and how the border nightmare on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris' watch has increased spending. And this is the problem with immigration that I tell people all the time. It has nothing to do with where people are from, or I'm not xenophobic, but the carrying capacity of financially of the United States has a limit. The story goes on to say the first report totaled spending on emergency Medicare services provided to migrants in 2017. They're still under Trump, mind you. Under federal law, only qualified aliens, including people like illegal permit residents, green card holders, etc., refugees and parolees into the United States are eligible for full Medicare benefit. So that's why they're having this mass parole. What they do is illegal immigrants or asylum seekers across the border illegal are taken into custody, and then they're granted mass parole. So under that, they're allowed to vote. So they have to wait. They should have a waiting period for 5 years. In other cases, CBO notes that the individuals who otherwise would qualify for Medicare, but for their immigrant status, can receive full medical emergencies that require immediate attention to prevent serious harm, disability, or death. They may also qualify for emergency labor and delivery services. So even more than just the health care. That's the problem with illegal immigration at this scale, is you can't afford it because you can't just turn these people onto the streets, although that's happening as well. More headlines from just the news. A new poll shows national debt concerning for swing state voters. What's happening here is, if people are concerned, is that the independent voter is very much concerned with the fiscal situation in the United States. That's what makes a conservative, is you don't want to spend. It's the liberal spending that is a concern. The story goes on to say a new poll of battleground states of the $35 trillion rising national debt and its debt service annually about $1 trillion. The swing state poll shows that 9 out of 10 voters want candidates to have a plan for the rising national debt. This includes 95% of those voting Democrat Vice President Kamala Harris, 97 of those voting for Republican former President Donald Trump, and 95 of undecided voters, 95%. States surveyed are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The poll conducted by the Democratic firm Global Strategy and the Republican firm North Star Opinion Poll Research was from the end of September. The national debt is a crucial campaign issue for voters in the decisive swing states. Not surprising. The fiscal situation in the United States is something of alarm. And people, of course, should take notice. So if all those people, including the Democrats in those states, if the 95% of those people are concerned with it, they should vote for a conservative. More spending. There's one problem you can't never fix with spending is debt. So the only things liberals can do is spend to fix problems. So you can't fix this problem by electing a Democrat. So I'm just saying that. Washington Post, China intensifies efforts to influence the 2024 election, focusing on local politicians. So the funny thing here is that China, the Washington Post is trying to suggest now that China isn't, they're influencing the election, but not the presidential election, that a new administration would affect China most. But they're not focusing on that. They're focusing on down ballot elections, which don't have any influence in China, presumably. The only way they would switch to down ballot races is if they had a lock for the federal election, the presidential election. So the story goes on to say China increasingly is targeting down ballot elections in America, according to the Washington Post analysis, and senior U.S. intelligence officials, not naming them, using fake accounts and social media to spread divisive and sometimes explicitly anti-Semitic claims and conspiracy theories about politicians. Is that what China's doing? The accounts are part of Spamifloss, China's largest known covert influence operation, which uses prolific distribution techniques to spread Chinese Communist Party talking points across the internet. Yeah. We know what that is. We know it's Spamifloss. I mean, the United States does the exact same thing on its own people, mind you. So there's no doubt that the Chinese are doing it or aiding it or assisting it. But the recent campaigns illustrate a shift in Chinese strategy. It seeks to actively influence political discourse in the United States, one focused on promotive, positive narratives about the CCP, of course. They're not, the Chinese are heavily influenced in the presidential election. But the Washington Post, which is a creature of U.S. intelligence, is telling you that that's not. And that a majority of the operations conducted on U.S. elections are conducted by the U.S. intelligence services, including the FBI, who sometimes say they have insurance plans if things don't go their way. It's all corrupt. Post-millennial. Reddit bans forum dedicated to sharing information about would-be Trump assassin Thomas Crooks. An archive of the subreddit shows that it was a popular forum that generated a high level of engagement. Reddit is owned by the Communist Chinese. So you have to ask yourself, why would the Communist Chinese, who are, by the way, in league with the Democratic Party and liberals, and other socialists and Fabians across the globe, why would they want to take down info sharing, crowdsourcing information about a crime that happened in the United States against former President Donald Trump? Why would that be? So the Post-Millennial goes on to say, a forum dedicated to the sharing of information about Thomas Crooks has been banned from Reddit. Reddit, a social forum and news aggregation website, said it banned Thomas Crooks subreddit because it violated its rules of posting violent content. I mean, it doesn't really matter what the Chinese think of it. You know, that's the whole thing. Places like Reddit and 4chan and 8chan, whatever, the whole reason they exist is so people could post comments. So Reddit, when they banned the subreddit, they didn't provide any information or detailed information about exactly how their policies were violated. I mean, it's like most of these tech companies. You do something wrong, they can't really point to it. They just say, we didn't like what you said. Just the news. A Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, Secretary of State, clash over handling of potential non-citizen voter rolls. What could this be possibly? Well, we know what it is. It is Attorney General Ken Paxton, who they tried to impeach twice, is battling with Secretary of State, who's also Republican, but this woman, Jane Nelson, doesn't want to take illegals off their voting rolls. Why would that be? All this is election interference. All the suppressing of the Hunter Biden story, the laptop story, that was blatant. They told Facebook and Twitter at the time, don't allow this stuff. The corporations obliged because they're all in it together. It's a conspiracy. All right. The Telegraph has an opinion piece. The West is sleepwalking into nuclear disaster. This is by Amish Den Brenton Gordon. But he mostly talks about the Middle East conflict and, you know, how Iran is developing a nuclear weapon and whatever. That's not really, the West is sleepwalking into nuclear disaster, but it has to do with World War and provoking Russia. Not so much anything to do with Iran. NPR is also reporting bidding wars brewing for Alex Jones' media empire. If you didn't know this, Alex Jones, well, the parents of Sandy Hook, with all their $100 gazillion reward for Alex Jones saying something naughty. So in that lawsuit that they're making them put up InfoWars on the auction block. And so the idea really is to shut down InfoWars, but Alex Jones promises he's going to return in some capacity. But straight from NPR, I'll read from the story. Both fans and foes are getting into the bidding war for Alex Jones's media company. Jones' InfoWars show and his parent company Free Speech Systems are being liquidated through federal bankruptcy court to pay Sandy Hook families who sued Jones for defamation after he spread lies that they were just actors and that their children were not really killed in the 2012 shooting. Joe owes the family some $1.5 billion in damages for the pain and suffering they endured. That's a lot of pain and suffering. Poor Alex Jones. See, that's the thing is, free speech isn't under attack. I mean, come on. $1.5 billion for saying something naughty. He wasn't even responsible at all for any of the harassment, which there was very little. Supposedly, it's all these stories that we never really got to the bottom of. Like they redacted the guy's name that was, he supposedly went up to a Sandy Hook family and said something. What he didn't say is, you know, Alex Jones sent me. In any case. Thanks for joining me today. Please engage the channel, like, subscribe. Leave a comment. Live every day, 10 a.m. on Rumble, Monday through Friday. See you tomorrow. Stay hip to the trick.
Rudy's Revelation.
Google me, bitch!